is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. Thanks for watching the Hot Zone. I'm in Alaska today, and I'm going out with my friend Brian Heafy on the Yukon River. This is the Yukon right here. It's a beautiful, beautiful day. Probably about, what do you think, 40 degrees, 40 something degrees. Not as cold as it was yesterday so far, but once we get going on the river, it's going to get pretty chilly because we're moving out. Brian lives pretty far away from here, and we're going to go check out what it's like to live alone in the wilderness of Alaska's Yukon, right along the Canadian border. It's pretty fascinating. Winter's coming on fast, so there's a lot to do. And Brian's going to show us a little bit about what it's like to live out here. I think you're going to find it as fascinating as I do. So stick around. Here we go.
I was very blessed to be able to grow up in a rural area of New England, Connecticut, Northwest Connecticut. As I got to the end of my high school years, I had done fairly well scholastically and athletically, and my father, who is a former Marine, suggested that I might be able to get into one of the service academies, so I applied to them all. I don't know, maybe there are some children at high school age that know what they want to do with the rest of their lives, but I wasn't one of them. I thought maybe I'd just be a farmer. I was nominated for all the service academies that I applied for, and I eventually chose Annapolis. Directly after graduation from Annapolis, out to SEAL training, or BUDS training they call it. I was successful in graduating. I think we graduated 23 out of our class out of 113 original. I was immediately assigned to an operational platoon, trained up, and went overseas right away for my first operational deployment. I did 3 back-to-back deployments. I felt very fortunate to still be alive at the end of those 5 years. I grew up in Town Farm Brook. You know, that was always my draw, to the outdoors, to the wilderness. And, you know, my father had a good plan for my education and military service, and I honored that, and I think it was a great idea, but it was time to move on. I think the effect that, you know, a lasting effect that having served in the military has had on me in a very beneficial way in all dimensions of my life is preparation, self-discipline, learning to form realistic goals according to the time that you have available. Where I live now, a little mistake at 60 degrees below zero in the dark can turn into a life-threatening scenario, and it does. The ice from the river during that flood actually came up to the base of those trees there. So it sheared off these trees. You see these trees laying down here? The big chunks of ice just sheared them off. And so my trail was covered, so I had to cut it out of the way. I'm going to just push all this back and make it as wide as the rest of it. So.
A lot of kindling.
Yeah, job security. Some people call it Murphy's Law. I call it the law of opposition. You know, there's always things working against you. You might not be aware of them at any given moment, but they're out there. So you kind of got to crank that into your thought process and preparations. So these are high bush cranberries, and the first frosts have come and gone, and the leaves are down, and it's the best time of year to eat these. The longer you wait, the sweeter they get. A little bit tart prior to the first frost. I eat them all year long, but they're great. Nature's Gatorade. My first work after leaving the Navy, I was a fishing guide, a drift boat guy on the Kenai River and a couple other local rivers, the Russian River and the Kasilof River. And then I took a caretaker position in the Lake Clark Preserve area. Learned how it felt to live off the road system, really out in the bush, so to speak, and it was a very good feeling.
This river normally provides a large amount of sustenance to the people that live along it, because there's tons of salmon and other fish that they net out of this. When you're sport fishing, you do it with a pole, but when you're fishing for your survival, you do it with a net or something like that, maybe a fish wheel. Out here, this is a very silty river, and so you can't really fish in the traditional methods. That's why they use a fish wheel, which is like a series of nets on a paddle wheel that scoops up the fish as they swim through. They say there's so much silt in the Yukon River that it's too thick to drink and too thin to plow.
Living here in a very austere environment, one of the most unforgiving environments on the planet, I would consider, because of the cold and the darkness and the rapid change of seasons, you begin to learn and focus on economy of time. There's only so many hours in a day. Pretty much everything you have to do is important. So again, what is best and what is good.
So keep in mind, at first, this was all treed in, and that was a wall tent. So that's how it all started out. Okay, don't touch the fence.
What'd you say?
I said, don't touch the fence. You'll never do it again if you do. This would be, it's about 13,000 volts. And it'll never stop a charging bear, but one that just comes by and is curious, it'll send them packing. So, oops. Turn it off before you cross over. That's probably the thing to do. Okay, and I'll just come back for you.
You don't get to turn your mind off. I think that's what separates a lot of people in society. And I'm not saying that's necessarily healthy in a physical sense, but it does add a sense of urgency and intensity and reveal to you what really is important, what really does matter. And a lot of what goes on in the world doesn't matter. Living out in such vast country, you really realize how small you are and vulnerable and fragile.
As I mentioned to you, one of my front door keys is a crescent wrench. You'll see I've got the door barred. That's to keep the bears from ripping it off the hinges, and anyone else who might come along. It's a little more work than just trying to tear the door down. So
you become very aware. You move with purpose. Not everybody does. I do because I have no help. Learning to move with purpose, to form a careful plan, and to be disciplined in your delivery, whether it's words or disciplined with each action, with each strike of an axe. It does create a slower movement of progress or slower forward motion, but you know, I'd rather do something well once than have to go back and do it twice when I've got other things to do. So the greatest danger to me is myself, if I were to get sloppy, so to speak. I think everything I do, everything I say, it's a matter of my own choice. And so I think the greatest dangers come from within. The greatest danger to me is me, if I'm not disciplined and I'm not and I don't keep God in first place in my life. It's as simple as that. And my everyday existence is pretty routine. Routine it makes a person pretty efficient. Everybody's got routine in their life. Most people do, most people who are effective. But there's certain things that just have to be done every day. And I think,
Like what?
well, you know, getting wood, hauling water, cooking, cleaning, you know, keeping ahead of the seasonal changes, making sure you're stocked up, equipment maintenance, you know, making sure you're exercising your body, which isn't too hard to do. But I think it's just my life would best be described as the perfection of vital activity. That's what I engage in. How can I become better at any given task at any time to become more efficient, more safe, more productive? And there's a joy in that. After quite a few years of writing for Christian magazines and websites and ministry newsletters and church bulletins, everybody's saying, when's the book coming out, Brian? When's the book coming out? And I'm like, well, boy, that seems like a huge mountain to climb. And by God's grace, someone approached me and said, hey, I want to help you put a book together. And the help was there, and I had quite a number of essays and articles and previous works to draw from. And so I put together a succinct, to the point, meat and potatoes book. It's for believers and non-believers alike to consider eternal things. If you're a believer, are you really living in stride with what God commands? If you're not a believer, why aren't you? And have you considered these things? And so the book I titled Crystal Vision. You know, a lot of people, you know, when they live out in the country for long periods of time, they get what we call around here bushy.
In this day and age of renaming and relabeling everything, I'm told this is a cordless hole puncher.
You know, just no interaction. I always decided to have a getaway, and the Bible espouses that. Jesus said, you know, come apart and rest a while. But the Bible in no way espouses stayaways. So I think it's good and instructive to have a getaway where you can draw nearer to God, focus on Him, pray that He'll reveal more of His character to us and to reveal more of His wisdom. But there's no wisdom to having a stay-away lifestyle. You're not part of the solution. You don't grow. You know, fellowship is a huge part of the Christian walk. We're strengthened by our brothers and sisters, and as I previously mentioned, they're the ones, if they're true friends and brothers and sisters, are going to help point out where we might be slipping a little bit, where there may be sin in our life that we don't notice. But my initial purpose in going outside and striking out on my own and developing this life, I had a general idea of what I wanted, but you know, there's that old saying, make your plans in pencil and give God the eraser. And I'm so thankful He took that eraser and rearranged some of my priorities, but it all worked together beautifully.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media.
Copyright 2021.